In the first lecture, we saw that the repressive hypothesis is misleading. Modern societies did not silence sex, they incited endless discourse about sex. Power over sex did not only say no, it produced new sexualities, new pleasures, and new knowledge. But this raises difficult question. If power is not just repression, what is it? How do we analyze power without reducing it to law, prohibition, and censorship? Foucault's answer is to replace the juridical model of power with a strategic model. Power is not a possession, it is not a substance, it is a network of force relations. It is everywhere. It has no sender. It is exercised, not owned. In this lecture, we will explore Foucault's positive theory of power. We will see how sexuality became a key target of modern power. We will examine the rise of biopower, power over life itself, and we will ask whether sex is really the truth we think it is. Let us start with the basic principle. Power is not only negative, it does not only say no, it produces things. It produces reality. It produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. Think of the prison. Yes, it punishes, but it also produces the delinquent as a new figure. It produces knowledge about crime. It produces techniques for managing populations. The same is true of sexuality. The medical and psychiatric discourses on sex did not just repress perversion. They produced the homosexual as a species. They produced the masturbating child as a problem. They produced the historical woman as a medical object. Power is productive. This is Foucault's most important claim. We must stop thinking of power only as a hand that pushes down. Power also lifts up, shapes, and creates. Second, power is not a substance. It is not something you can seize or give away. It is a multiplicity of force relations. These relations are everywhere. They are immanent in every social interaction, in the family, in the school, in the hospital, in the bedroom. Power is not located in a single source, the state, the king, the ruling class. It comes from below. Third, power relations are intentional but non subjective. This sounds strange. Let me explain. Power relations are full of calculation. They have aims and objectives, but no single person invented them. No single person controls them. They emerge from countless local tactics. These tactics link together, reinforce each other, and form comprehensive strategies, yet no one is the author. No one sits in a headquarters deciding everything. Fourth, where there is power, there is resistance. Resistance is not outside power, it is inside it. It is the other term in every power relation. Resistances are multiple, mobile, and transitory. They are not a single great refusal, they are scattered points of opposition, but they can be codified into strategies. A revolution is the strategic codification of many points of resistance. How do we study power without falling back into the juridical model? Foucault offers 4 rules. First, rule of immanence. Power and knowledge are not separate, they are always linked. Every exercise of power produces knowledge. Every piece of knowledge is an effect of power. So we must study them together. We must identify local centers of power, knowledge. For example, the confessional. There, the priest's power and the knowledge of sins are one. Or the school. There, the teacher's surveillance and the knowledge of child sexuality are one. Second, rule of continual variations. Power relations are not static, they are constantly shifting. The doctor might start with authority over the patient, but the patient might gain pleasure from the attention. The pleasure might give the patient a kind of power. The relation changes. We must trace these transformations. Third is the rule of double conditioning. Local power relations and global strategies condition each other. No local mechanism works without being linked to a larger strategy. No global strategy works without being anchored in local mechanisms. The family is a local site of power, but the family also serves the larger strategy of population control. Fourth, rule of tactical polyvalence of discourses. Discourses are not simply tools of power, nor are they simply weapons against power. They are tactical elements. They can be used in many ways. The same discourse can serve power or resist it. For example, the medical discourse on homosexuality called it a perversion. That was a tool of power, but later homosexuals used the same discourse to demand recognition. They said, if we are a natural species, we have rights. The same discourse turned around. So we must not ask, is this discourse dominant or subversive? We must ask, how is it being used? In what strategy? Now let us apply these rules. What were the major strategies of power over sex in the 19th century? Foucault identifies four. First, the hysterization of women's bodies. The female body was saturated with sexuality. It was seen as inherently pathological. Women were called nervous. They were diagnosed with vapors and hysteria. Their sexuality was tied to reproduction. They were responsible for the health of their children. They were the guardians of the family. So their bodies had to be monitored, disciplined, and treated. Second, the pedagogization of children's sex. Children were seen as constantly threatened by sexual activity. Masturbation was called an epidemic. Doctors warned that it would cause blindness, insanity, and degeneracy. Parents were told to watch their children day and night. Schools built separate dormitories. Teachers woke children to check on them. The child's sex became a permanent object of anxiety and intervention. Third, the socialization of procreative behavior. The state took an interest in birth rates. It encouraged or discouraged marriage. It offered tax benefits for large families. It punished contraception. It worried about the health of future workers and soldiers. The couple's bedroom became a political issue. Fourth, the psychiatrization of perverse pleasure. Sexual instinct was isolated as a separate biological force. It could have anomalies. It could develop in wrong directions. Homosexuality, fetishism, sadism, and countless other perversions were named, classified, and studied. These were not just forbidden acts, they were pathologies. They required treatment. Each of these strategies created a figure: the hysterical woman, the masturbating child, the Malthusian couple, the perverse adult. These figures were both targets and instruments of power. To understand what is new about these strategies, we must contrast two systems. The deployment of alliance is the old system. It is centered on marriage, kinship, and the transmission of names and property. Its main tool is law. Its main rule is prohibition. Its main goal is reproduction. It is homeostatic. It tries to keep the social body stable. The deployment of sexuality is the new system. It emerged in the 18th century. It is centered on bodies, sensations, and pleasures. Its tools are not laws but techniques: surveillance, examination, confession, normalization. Its goal is not reproduction but proliferation. It penetrates bodies, it intensifies pleasures, it creates new sexualities. The two deployments are not opposed, They overlap and support each other. The family is the key link. The family is an alliance system, marriage and descent. But the family is also the primary site of deployment of sexuality. Parents watch children, spouses confess to each other, relatives worry about heredity. This is why incest is so important in modern culture. It is the point where the two deployments meet. Incest is the ultimate crime in the alliance system. You marry the wrong person. But incest is also the ultimate fantasy in the deployment of sexuality. You desire your own mother. We talk endlessly about incest because it connects the law of alliance to the desire of sexuality. When did the deployment of sexuality begin? And who started it? The repressive hypothesis says the bourgeoisie created repression to control the working class. They needed workers' labor, not their pleasure. So they imposed silence. Foucault says the opposite. The bourgeoisie first applied the new techniques to themselves. They worried about their own bodies, their own health, their own children, and their own heredity. The working classes were left alone for a long time. Their sexuality was not a concern. They reproduced anyway. It did not matter if they lived or died. Only later, in the 19th century, did the deployment of sexuality spread to the poor. This happened through housing reform, public hygiene, compulsory schooling, and the fight against venereal disease. So, the deployment of sexuality was not a weapon of class domination, it was a form of class self affirmation. The bourgeoisie distinguished itself from the aristocracy by caring about its body, not its blood. The nobility cared about lineage and honor. The bourgeoisie cared about health, hygiene, and heredity. This is why the bourgeoisie invented eugenics, not to destroy the poor, but to improve its own race, to make its own children stronger, to ensure its own future. The proletariat received a sexuality only when it became useful. When heavy industry needed stable workers, when cities needed healthy populations, when the state needed soldiers, then the working class got schools, clinics, housing projects, and family allowances, along with all the surveillance that came with them. Now we arrive at Foucault's most famous concept, biopower. For centuries, sovereign power was the power to take life or let live. The king could kill you or he could spare you. That was his power over life. It was a power of death. Modern power is different. It is a power to foster life or disallow it to the point of death. It does not just kill, it manages, optimizes, and multiplies life. Biopower has two poles. The first pole is anatomopolitics of the human body. This is the discipline of the body as a machine. Schools train bodies, barracks shape soldiers, factories organize workers. This pole aims to increase the usefulness and docility of individual bodies. The second pole is biopolitics of the population. This is the regulation of collective life processes, birth rates, death rates, life expectancy, health, hygiene, housing, and migration. This pole aims to control the biological destiny of the species. Sexuality is the pivot between these two poles. Sex is about the body, pleasures, sensations, orgasms. That is the individual pole. But sex is also about the species, reproduction, heredity, population. That is the collective pole. So, sexuality became the key target of biopower. With biopower, the norm replaces the law. Law says, do this or die. The norm says, be healthy, be normal, be productive. Law punishes after the fact. The norm regulates before the fact. Law is a sword, the norm is a measurement. We live in a normalizing society, not a society of law. Schools, hospitals, factories, and prisons all evaluate us, they rank us, they classify us as normal or abnormal. This is the legacy of biopower. Now we reach the most radical part of Foucault's argument. He asks, what is sex? We think sex is a biological given. It is the body, the organs, the hormones, and the genes. It is the natural foundation of everything. Foucault says no. Sex is an imaginary point created by the deployment of sexuality. It is a fiction, but it is a useful fiction. Why was sex invented? For three reasons. First, to unify a disparate set of phenomena: anatomy, functions, behaviors, sensations, and pleasures. All of these were grouped under one word, sex. This made them seem like a single cause, a single secret behind everything. Second, to give sexuality a scientific guarantee. By linking to biology, the discourse on sex borrowed the authority of science. Doctors could say sex explains illness, degeneracy, race, and history. This was not true science, but it looked like science. Third, to invert the real relation between power and sex. The truth is that power produces sexuality, but the discourse on sex made it seem that sex is a hidden force that power tries to repress. So when we say yes to sex, we think we are saying no to power. This is the great deception. The deployment of sexuality makes us believe that our liberation depends on freeing our sex. But our sex is not a natural power, it is a historical product. When we affirm our sex, we are not resisting power, we are following the path that power has laid for us. This is the irony of modern sexuality. We think we are being subversive, we think we are transgressing the old taboos, but we are only playing the game that the deployment of sexuality has been playing for centuries. If sex is a trap, what is the alternative? Foucault's answer is clear. Do not rally around sex desire. Do not make sex the truth of your being. Do not treat sexual liberation as a political program. Instead, rally around bodies, pleasures, and knowledges in their multiplicity, in their possibility of resistance. What does this mean practically? First, stop asking, what is the truth of my sex? Start asking, what can my body do? What pleasures can it produce? What sensations can it feel? Second, stop treating sexuality as a deep secret. Treat it as a surface, a network of power relations, a field of tactical possibilities. Third, do not try to free your desire. Desire does not exist before power. Desire is produced by power. Instead, experiment with your body. Create new pleasures. Invent new relationships. This is not about discovering a natural self. It is about constructing something new. Foucault is not against sex. He is against the deployment of sexuality. He is against making sex the measure of truth, identity, and liberation. He dreams of a different economy of bodies and pleasures. One day, perhaps, people will no longer understand why we were so obsessed with sex. They will look back and smile. They will see that we were not liberating ourselves. We were only chasing a shadow. Let me end with a final summary. Foucault's History of Sexuality, Volume 1, is not a history of sexual practices. It is a history of discourse, power, and knowledge. It shows how sex was turned into a great secret, a hidden truth, and a key to our identity. It shows that the repressive hypothesis is a myth, but it is a useful myth. It serves the deployment of sexuality. It keeps us talking, it keeps us confessing, it keeps us attached to power. The true historical transformation is not sexual freedom to repression. It is from a symbolics of blood to an analytics of sexuality, from a society of sovereignty, law, and death to a society of biopower, norm, and life. We are not repressed, we are incited. We are not silenced, we are made to speak. We are not liberated by affirming our sex, we are caught in a trap. The task then is not to liberate sex, the task is to think differently, to invent new forms of life, to experiment with bodies and pleasures, to resist the deployment of sexuality without falling back into the old language of repression and liberation. This is why Foucault ends the book with a famous phrase. He does not say, free your desire, he says, bodies, pleasures, and knowledges, in their multiplicity and their possibility of resistance. This is a difficult message, but it is also a hopeful one. It means we are not doomed to repeat the same old story. We can break with the confession. We can stop searching for the truth of our sex. We can start creating new ways of living. That is the real challenge of the history of sexuality. Not to find a better answer to the question, what is sex, but to stop asking that question altogether and to ask instead, what can bodies do? What pleasures can we invent? What can we resist power without becoming its mirror image? These are the questions Foucault leaves us with. They are as urgent today as when he wrote them.